What's up, guys? Welcome back to Promotech. Thanks for tuning in. One UI 9 looks like a normal yearly Samsung update on the surface, but after using it side by side with iOS 26 for a while, it honestly feels like Samsung finally understood something most Android brands never fully figured out. People don't stay loyal to iPhones because of specs anymore. They stay because of feeling, consistency, and tiny emotional details they notice hundreds of times a day without realizing it. And for the first time in years, Samsung is dangerously close to cracking that formula. So today we've got the Samsung Galaxy S26 Ultra running One UI 9 on one side, and the iPhone 16 Pro running iOS 26 on the other. And trust me, some of these differences look small at first, until you realize what Samsung is actually trying to do here. Let's dive right into the video. The very first thing that changes the vibe of the phone is the lock screen. And no, I'm not talking about customization itself, because Samsung has always had customization. The difference now is presentation. Earlier One UI versions felt powerful but messy. One UI 9 suddenly feels curated. The new clock system, the smoother scaling, the layered depth effects, it feels less like Android options everywhere, and more like Samsung carefully directing your attention. Then you place it next to iOS 26, and this is where things get interesting. Apple still wins at restraint. Everything feels controlled and calculated. But Samsung's new lock screen feels alive in a way previous Galaxy phones never did. The weather effects, the gallery frames, the motion layers, there's more energy here. And that new waveform animation inside the music player completely changes the personality of the device. On iOS, Dynamic Island still behaves more naturally, almost like it belongs inside the hardware itself. But Samsung's animation feels more expressive, more dramatic, almost like it wants you to notice it every single time. And honestly, that might be intentional. Because if you look closely, Samsung is no longer designing One UI like a traditional Android skin. They're designing it like an experience people emotionally attach to. That's a massive shift. Even the home screen tells the story. Previous Galaxy phones focused on speed and functionality first. One UI 9 focuses on motion. Tiny transitions now stretch slightly longer. Elements react with more weight. Animations flow into each other instead of abruptly ending. It sounds minor until you use both phones side by side for a few hours. Suddenly the Galaxy starts feeling calmer, smoother, more expensive. What shocked me most, though, was the control center redesign. This is one of those changes casual users might ignore, but long-term users will instantly feel it. Samsung finally cleaned up the visual hierarchy. The brightness area no longer feels overloaded. Toggles breathe better. Spacing looks intentional, and customization no longer breaks the design language. Earlier One UI versions gave you freedom, but sometimes punished you visually for using it. One UI 9 fixes that. Apple still has the cleaner blur engine, though. You can immediately see it when both control centers open side by side. iOS 26 still blends layers more naturally, while Samsung pushes stronger contrast. But weirdly enough, Samsung's version now feels more modern instead of overly technical. That's a huge improvement. And here's the deeper story nobody's really talking about yet. Samsung is quietly attacking Apple's ecosystem advantage piece by piece. Features like Tap to Share feel heavily inspired by AirDrop behavior. But Samsung's goal isn't just copying functionality anymore. They're removing friction. They want Galaxy users to stop feeling like they're missing out socially when everyone around them uses iPhones. That's why One UI 9 matters more than people think. This update feels like Samsung preparing Android for a future where AI, animations, sharing, widgets, lock screens, and system behavior all merge into one adaptive experience instead of separate features. You can already see the early signs of it here. The UI reacts more contextually now. Music visuals adapt better. Motion feels more connected. The phone behaves less like software and more like a living system responding to what you're doing. And quick side note, this is exactly why I always tell people software experience matters more now than raw hardware numbers. Most users upgrade phones chasing specs they'll never fully use while ignoring the thing they interact with literally thousands of times every day, the interface. That's also why platforms like Wolververse have been growing lately, because more users are starting to care about smarter setup experiences, UI optimization, and getting more out of devices they already own instead of blindly upgrading every single year. Also, if you're part of the 70% watching who still aren't subscribed, definitely join the channel because this community catches the subtle industry shifts before they become mainstream. Most channels talk about megapixels and benchmarks. We pay attention to the stuff companies quietly change before it reshapes the entire market. And honestly, after spending time with both of these, One UI 9 doesn't feel like Samsung chasing Apple anymore. It feels like Samsung studying human behavior. The real question is what happens next year when Galaxy AI gets deeply integrated into these animations, lock screens, and adaptive system interactions. Because if Samsung keeps moving in this direction, the difference between using an Android phone and using an iPhone might stop being about apps or specs entirely, and start becoming about which company understands people better. Take care and stay safe.